Hello everyone. For this final week, I identified mostly some additional concepts as well as theory to solidify and review all the information that we've gone over this course. Beginning on the general public administration side, I wanted to go back over the enhanced unified ethic and the use of practical ethics in administration, which applies both on the general as well as the management and leadership side, but I referenced it here because no matter where you are in the organization, the ethical question is something that can easily be overlooked but really should not be, especially in public service. I also wanted to talk about the general theory and ideas revolving around new public administration. The paper was written by Frederickson, and he was also part of what was originally started by Waldo with the Middlebrook conferences and the discussion of how public administration will remain relevant and effective as new challenges come up. On the PSML side, I chose emotional intelligence. This was an article written by the psychologist Daniel Goleman, and we touched on it in organizational behavior class and possibly some other areas, and I felt it was a really great concept that reflected the connectedness of managing and leading. And also I chose authentic leadership and managing transition. This was in our leadership class, and it also talks about competencies that bridge the managing and leadership aspects as you go through transitions or other types of challenges as an organization and as a manager. Well, I chose to talk about the unified ethic in terms of general public administration, as I said, because it can affect you regardless of whether you're a manager or what level you're at. And in unified ethic, we have the deontology, teleology, intuitionism, and virtue theory, also known as character theory. And the enhanced unified ethic is when it is applied within the organizational context. And this is very important, although it can easily be overlooked because of everything, the fact that everything is policy and regulation. For example, it might seem like teleology is the default way that things happen in public sector, and um, but that doesn't account for the various scenarios that we may encounter in which the unified ethic is a useful mechanism for having a framework for thinking about how to handle those situations, which are not always clearly cut. And they give us various examples within our ethics class, and the book is listed here if anybody wants to go back and look at it. One example I can remember had to do with a investigator or some type of police or law enforcement official who was off duty in his vehicle and was pulled over by another police officer who noticed that he was either speeding or didn't have his seatbelt on or something like that. And he was insisting that the police officer let it go and don't file the ticket because he is directly in contact with a high-ranking member of the law enforcement organization, and he was conducting business for him, and so it should be let go on those grounds. And so the police officer made his own ethical judgment that perhaps deontologically or by his virtue decided that wasn't a correct reason to dismiss the ticket. So he went ahead and issued the ticket, and ultimately that high-ranking official did remove the ticket, if I remember, and it was a question kind of whether or not he was acting on a moral temptation, a temptation to kind of cover up a situation or make the situation go away, or was it really more of an ethical dilemma? Was there a justifiable reason why he was dismissing that ticket, and maybe that was the least bad course of action for him to take. And we can just see how easily we can come across these situations in the public sector, and why having the unified ethic as a framework for processing these scenarios is very helpful. So new public administration is definitely a GPA concept, and we've been discussing new public administration for quite a long time, so the word new is kind of relative in a sense, but it comes back to the Middlebrook Conferences, which was started by Dwight Waldo and put into an essay by George Fredrickson, and kind of discussing how the things that make public administration relevant continue to change and evolve, and where it's heading. We began by focusing on efficiency and structure, and we had Taylor and we had Weber, and then they postulated that social equity was another thing that we're going to continue to focus on. And Dwight Waldo also mentioned that our American democracy is going to have an effect on how the new public administration will foresee the new challenges. And the example that I can give, which kind of they talk about it in the second and third Middlebrook conferences, where we're focusing more on management, worker relations, client focus, social equity, and the effect of technology and the social integration of administration and globalization. Easily we can think about how that affects our government and that affects my organization, even DPSS. Everything is becoming digital, and there's just as we had the change from a more centralized bureaucracy to a decentralized bureaucracy, we're going to continue with that process as we move further and further into new areas, and we're going to have to make sure that we're noticing, are we serving the public in the most relevant way? Are we going to have to come up with new ways of doing things? It's really an area where you can really digress upon everything we know about where we've come and where we might be headed to. So it's an interesting concept to think about. Here on the PSML side, I chose emotional intelligence, and this was a concept that was brought up in our organizational behavior class. It was also brought up in another section as well. But this was based on an article written by a psychologist named Daniel Goleman, and I feel like this concept is one of my favorites because it really synthesizes all the changes that we've made to our theory from Mary Parker Follett up until now, in which Follett was discussing something totally new in the giving of orders and the psychology of delegating a task to a worker who is at odds between wanting to resist that delegation but also wanting to comply in order to retain their job or retain their reputation or whatever their motivation is. And there's so many different factors that affect moods and the culture and environment of our organizations, and emotional intelligence is having these factors listed here, such as self-awareness and self-regulation, to be able to notice these subtle factors and tap into those things when we are trying to decide the best way to bring about an outcome based on the situation. And this is a task that managers increasingly need to possess, and it goes into connecting, managing, and leading in the same instance, where we're delegating as a manager normally would do, but we really need to get the buy-in of the workers and get them get an understanding and an appreciation for the situation. And that requires that factor of awareness and the empathy and motivation on the manager's part, but also being able to inspire motivation on the worker's part just an extremely important concept that every manager has to know about. And this one is authentic leadership, and this was a concept that was in our leadership class. It's only available in the online library, and it's a model that has to do with these competencies listed here that, when used together correctly, help to build trust and help to ultimately develop stronger teams and to be able to make changes and adjustments. And so it talks about the structural side and the people side, and the structural side is really the managing side. Re-engineering, reorganizing, restructuring, whether that be change or that just be setting the policy from a management perspective. And that is more of a mechanical thing that a manager does on a normal basis. But there's also this people side element in which, when you're going through something like a transition, there's a process that you can go through. There's a lot of discomfort in sometimes realizing that something has to change in the organization. And I myself know that I've been guilty of being resistant to change or to transition at times. The example is our caseload sizes and our caseload model. We have done various different types of styles, and it changes a lot. And we've gone from day-to-day type models to monthly models, which requires a different style of managing your work, and it requires a different level of personal communication and involvement with your customer. So it's just a matter of pros and cons, and it really is an important thing that for the worker to have a manager who can empathetically listen and provide realistic feedback and kind of go through the process with you, like still demonstrating strength and resolve through a process, but also having a human supportive reaction during the process. It seems like an important concept that helps us to think about the relationship aspect of our organization and our management, that we can definitely benefit from that. In conclusion, the broader goal of public administration for us is going to be to remain relevant in serving the public interest and finding ways to be increasingly more equitable and innovative, following along with the pillars of administration and making sure that we are relevant within the changing societal circumstances, which is dominated by technology and the social integration of everything. And along with all that change that's going to be over the next 50 years, that's also going to affect what the task of management is calling us to do. And we've seen through the advent of organizational behavior that it's becoming increasingly reliant and integrated with leadership traits and the competencies of emotional management, and being able to integrate those things into the everyday task of management within the scope of the changing circumstances of our broader public administration mission.